Some things that you see, hear, or experience will stop you dead in your tracks. This next segment is dedicated to 3 examples that ignited an immediate response and are designed for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the first of 3 speakers in this segment, the SVP, Director of R&D Labs at MullenLowe Mediahub, Laurel Boyd.
It's you and your world and I'm caught in the middle.
Hi everyone.
The edge of the knife and the
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Ad Club, for having me. And I'm really excited to take you guys through this campaign that we did for Altered Carbon. If I can get this to work. There we go. So before we get into this, I wanted to give you a little background on our relationship with Netflix. So we've been the lead media agency for Netflix for about 3 years now, and the agency relationship is a little bit different. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on that, and then also give you some background on the entertainment landscape. So Netflix is slated to spend $8 billion this year in content, and that's a number that's going up increasingly year over year. And that's not just on original series, that also includes full feature films, and that's with the goal in mind of having 50% original content in their library. And so between series and full feature films, we're kept pretty busy. But Netflix is just only one option available to consumers. The competitive landscape is getting really fierce. Last year, John Landgraf came right out and said just under 500 series aired in 2017. And we did our own proprietary research just on the current state of television viewing, and 2 stats really stood out to us. The first is that 31% of all adults are completely overwhelmed by the amount of choice that they have available to them. And the second one is almost half of all adults only have time to add 1 to 3 shows to their schedule. So when you think about A, getting people to know about your show, and B, getting people to actually watch it, it's getting harder and harder. So Netflix combats this in 2 ways. The first way is through their algorithm. So this guy on the right is Reed Hastings, and you might be familiar with him, but he and his team are the ones that make every piece of content that you see in your content recommendation engine on the Netflix service something that you will love. And then once you actually choose to watch that content, they make sure it's optimized based on the device that you're going to be viewing it on, and then also based on your connection speed. So you love your experience and you keep coming back day after day. And then the other way that they stand out is by creating amazing content that people talk about. And that's really where we come in. So Netflix has massive amounts of user data, and so they do most of their really hardcore subscription driving media in-house. What they task us with is making marketing that's just as talked about as the content itself. And we like to talk about this goal as making the 6 o'clock news. And really what this means is piercing culture. If we're being totally honest, we don't get there every time. I would say probably about 20% of the time this actually happens, but this is always what we aspire to ensure that the goal is really high. And we do that through creative-driven media planning. So we like to start with every title. We like to start with the idea and let the media sort of fall out of that versus the other way around. And we found that there are 4 things that are really successful when we're planning these campaigns. The first is to be unexpected. Consumers will just remember things that they've never seen before. So we always try to do something a little different and try to put a unique twist on things so that people remember us. The second is we like to create media that isn't for sale. So we like to think outside of existing ad units and work with our partners to figure out maybe what's a brand new ad unit that's never been done. In the case of out of home, maybe it's building something entirely from scratch. And then these last 2 are a little bit more obvious, but whenever we can, when we're thinking about a title, we try to figure out who is the audience that's going to be just really fanatical about this series or title and over-deliver against them. Because if you can make them notice you, they will happily do a lot of the work for you and create a lot of earned media. And then the last one is be relevant. So whenever we can, we try to push off of pop culture. Netflix itself is creating culture, so we really need to make sure that we're on top of what's happening in pop culture and reacting to that. So we have two groups internally that are very crucial to helping us do that. And the first one is our comms planning group. We call it the Insight and Action team. And this team is really dedicated to getting really deep into consumer audiences and the subcultures and figuring out what are those really unique insights that we can push off of for ideation. And then the second group is called the R&D Lab. And this group is a creative media group within Mediahub that thinks about creative media around the clock. So we are a creative media organization at our core, but what we find is that even the most creative media planners, when you're sort of in the throes of pulling media plans together and poring over spreadsheets, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, it's difficult to sort of take a step back and have time to really think about, okay, what's an idea that could really make this plan interesting? So this group works really closely with the media team. We come up with ideas that make sure that the flow chart looks good, not just on paper, but to the consumers as well. So that's just a little bit of background on us. Now I'm going to get into Altered Carbon. So if you haven't seen this series, it's a sci-fi series. It takes place in the year 2384. And the basic premise is that your entire consciousness can be downloaded into this piece of hardware called a cortical stack. And if you have $1 million, because that's the starting price, you can purchase a body from a company called Psychosec and insert the chip into the body and essentially live forever. So we had a few challenges with this campaign. The first one is that sci-fi is a really competitive genre. There's already hundreds of titles in this space, and so we needed to do something a little bit different to stand out. The second is that this is a really tough audience. They've seen everything, they know everything sci-fi has to offer, and they really need to be convinced that your series is worth their time. And then the last one is, even though we were trying to really appeal to this hardcore sci-fi audience, we also wanted to reach sort of the fringe viewer and casual sci-fi viewers, so we didn't want to get too in-world that we completely alienated a broader audience. So our goal with this campaign was to surprise the unsurprisable. So everything we wanted to do with this campaign needed to make people stop and say, that's really cool, Netflix gets me as a sci-fi viewer, and Netflix really knows how to do sci-fi. So we kicked off the campaign with an activation at CES, and CES made sense for a bunch of reasons. Obviously, our target audience was there, or if they weren't there in person, they'd be following the coverage online. So we started with an activation there, and we knew it was going to be a challenge just because you're competing with so much of the coverage, whether it's new devices and new technology, but we knew if we could pull something off, it would be a huge win with this audience. So we partnered with an out-of-home company called Camp Grizzly, and we literally brought the Psychosec booth, and Psychosec, again, is the company that makes the bodies in the series. We brought it to the CES floor, and we had two prototypes that you can see here, and they were 360, so people could really walk around and check them out. And then we actually had Psychosec employees on the floor that were educating people who visited the booth about what was going to be possible in the very near future. So I'm going to just play you a very quick clip of that. Oops. Maybe not. Hold on. Oh, there we go.
So here at Psychosec, we've been able to achieve true immortality by taking your human consciousness and storing it on a device called a cortical stack. It's implanted in the base of your neck, and it collects and stores everything that makes you you. Every memory, every emotion, every sensation, everything you've ever experienced gets stored on this little device.
And so then we took it even a step further just to make people kind of keep guessing and wondering if this is real. And we staged a fake protest outside of CES protesting Psychosec. And we didn't actually tell people that this was a Netflix series until they got to the very end of the exhibit. And as you can imagine, you know, a lot of people knew it was fake, but there were a lot of people that thought it was real. Like just watching people engage with the Psychosec employees, people were saying things like, well, what happens to my soul when my consciousness gets downloaded? Where does that go? Or, you know, what if my entire digital consciousness doesn't get downloaded? Am I not really myself when I'm in this new body? Just very confused. But this was a huge success for us. We got a lot of industry press, and obviously it created a lot of intrigue for the series. So for this next piece, I'm going to tell you how we got a little bit crazy with some bus shelters. So whenever we start thinking about a title, we always start with the key art, because that obviously gives you sort of the tone and the look of the look and feel for the series. So in this particular case, the client sent us this key art, and they said, you know, what's something really interesting we could do with this key art? And as we really thought about this audience, you know, it's an audience that really values world building. They want to know that you put a lot of time and effort into that. So we knew we couldn't just slap some poster art in out of home and call it a day. We knew we needed to do something different. So what we did was we brought living, breathing sculptures to life and put them into bus shelters. So this is sort of where the concept netted out. And once we had kind of nailed down the concept, the first order of business was getting someone to run it. So as you can imagine, when you call these out-of-home companies and say, hey, I want to put some naked bodies in some bus shelters, we didn't get an overwhelmingly positive response. So I think we probably called 8 or 9 before someone finally agreed to do it. And that place was West Hollywood, California. So we purchased 5 different bus shelters right on Santa Monica Boulevard. So once we had that all set, we could get into the fun part. So we worked with our out-of-home company, Rapport, and we hired an artist to actually sculpt a mold of the bodies that you see in the key art. They made 3 female sculptures and 2 male, and they really put a lot of care into the details of the sculpture. So even the curvature of the toes and the way that the fingers were positioned looked really human. So they just put a lot of attention into the detail to ensure that they would actually look like a human being when they were in the shelter. And then because we knew that this audience wouldn't be satisfied just looking at these bus shelters, we figured they would probably try to touch them and poke and prod them. And so we put a layer of silicone over them so that when you touched it, it would feel, you know, sort of squishy like human skin. And then, as you can see, people definitely wanted to touch it. And this next piece, it was really important to us to have the bodies be breathing. We thought that would add a really visually arresting element to this and make people really stop and take a closer look. And so we worked with an engineer. We created these little motors, and the motors were on a timer that mimicked the way humans breathe when they're in deep sleep. And we even went a step further, and because men and women breathe at different paces, we had different ones for the female sculptures than the male sculptures to account for that. And as we were developing this, we also wanted to include a heater, because we wanted, in case people touched it, we wanted it to feel warm like a human. But it turns out that these motors sort of heated up the body on their own. So we got sort of a 2-for-1 deal with that. And then the last and final piece was covering the bodies in this sort of silicone goo. So in the series, the bodies are embalmed in a sort of nutrition gel. And of course, this didn't exist, so we had to work with a chemist to create it. We wanted something that was really squishy, but then something also that wouldn't melt in the hot California sun. So this was something they created from scratch. We covered the bodies in it so it would look just like the ones in the series. And then the final step was just kind of packaging everything together. We put it in the plastic bag with the instructions, just like you see in the Altered Carbon series. We hung them in the shelters and waited for people to discover them. So these were a huge hit. The bus shelters alone got 15 million earned impressions, and we literally made the 6 o'clock news. I'm going to show you some examples in a minute, but the coolest thing about this, we actually went to see them the day after they were installed, and it was during rush hour on Santa Monica Boulevard, and people literally stopped their cars, got out, took a picture, ran back into their car, and drove away. So it definitely achieved the objective of making people stop and look and consider them. And then the final component of this campaign was a content series that we did with Wired, but I actually have a case video that's going to show how all these pieces came together, and it does a good job of explaining that. So I'm just going to play the video.
The Netflix original series, Altered Carbon, explores the possibilities of eternal life, where a digital version of our consciousness can be easily downloaded into a new body. Both futuristic and philosophical, the dystopian series had all the key elements to create a big splash with sci-fi fans, and Netflix was counting on their excitement to make the series a success. The challenge? Research showed that sci-fi fans wouldn't be an easy target. They're smart, They feel like they've seen everything sci-fi has to offer and can spot BS from a million light years away. We needed to convince them Altered Carbon was truly unique and that Netflix was serious about sci-fi. And we couldn't just tell them. Hell no. We needed to show them and, if possible, surprise them. We started promoting the show at CES with a booth for Psychosec, the corporation within Altered Carbon that offers the elite classic chance at immortality by creating custom human bodies known as sleeves.
Wondering what's a human sleeve?
Outside CES, we staged a protest against Psychosec and didn't say any of it was from Netflix until the end of the experience. They were surprised in an environment where it's almost impossible to surprise. We then turned to Wired with a surprising and immersive digital experience highlighting how close today's technology is to the tech in Altered Carbon. Self-aware AI running an entire hotel, VR and police interrogations, and 3D printers generating perfect living copies of humans. They were engaged. Clicks to the digital experience were 27 times benchmark. Finally, we showed sci-fi fans on the streets of LA with bus shelters customized to hold lifelike, breathing human bodies waiting in stasis.
People around here are stopping in their tracks because of this.
And was it surprising? Many stopped their cars and poked, prodded, and took pictures. Images and videos of the bodies were sent around the world and pushed to the front page of sci-fi go-to sites Reddit and Imager. Not once or twice, but 3 times. Suddenly, they weren't just sci-fi fans. They were Altered Carbon fans. Their enthusiasm pushed the show to the #1 most talked about new streaming series and the most searched for TV show in February. And Netflix rewarded them by greenlighting another season of their new favorite show, Altered Carbon.
So just a few things that we learned with this campaign. The first one is don't be afraid to be edgy or provocative. There were several times during the planning of this campaign where we thought, are we taking this a step too far? Are we totally crazy? The answer is yes. But at the end of the day, we just went for it and it worked. The second piece, and this is really key, is it's all in the details. I think, we really went the extra mile in delivering the living, breathing bodies with the breathing machines, and I think even putting the protest outside of CES was what really made people stop and consider it and think that's a show that I want to check out. And then the final one, in the words of Hillary Clinton, it takes a village. There were a lot of really talented people who helped bring this campaign to life, and I think the common thing among all of them were that they really sweat the details. And so I think anytime you're working on a project like this, find those people because they're really the ones that sort of brought the magic to life. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't say that our job is a lot easier when we have a client who's willing to take risks and get a little dangerous with us. So shoot for the moon is something that Shauna Spenley, our most senior client at Netflix, always says. And that's something that we always keep in mind as we're planning these campaigns, and it was certainly the inspiration behind this one. That's it. Thank you.